All right. Peace and greetings, YouTubers. Little Richard. Another tragic loss to the industry. It's crazy. Today has just been wild, hasn't it? But you know, there was no way I could possibly not do something in regards to everything that this man has accomplished. Because when you talk about a pioneer in the industry, he's already somebody who I feel the industry always looked over. He's somebody who I feel the industry sometimes tried to chip away at their legacy and downplay what it is they contributed to music. And that's kind of been the thing you've seen happen with many black entertainers. You know, I think they've done that with Nina Simone. I think they've done that with Sam Cooke. Even with some of the more recent artists, somebody like a Layla Hathaway, I think a lot of times the industry kind of ignores the contributions that are made. And over time, it's almost as if they leave them out of the conversations purposely sometimes. And I think Little Richard is a prime example of what the industry attempted to do, you know, but at the end of the day, the music spoke for itself, and there's no way you can deny the contribution somebody like Little Richard has made. When I look at somebody like Little Richard, for me, he's a pioneer of pretty much what would happen in music. It's almost like he had a handful of seeds and just threw them in the field, and they grew into all kind of lanes. They grew into a Jimi Hendrix, or they grew into an Eric Clapton, or they grew into, you know, just so many different layers, or they grew into the different elements of what rock and roll would become and transition into rock and so on and so forth. And everything indirectly just connects to one thing. And that's one of the cool things about music. Sometimes you're influenced by people and you didn't even know they existed, you know, because when I look at Little Richard, his influences, one of his big ones was Rosetta Tharpe, who most people aren't really familiar with because she's just from such an earlier era that unless you really read the history books, she's not going to be somebody that pops up in your average conversation unless you are of an older age. But specifically for my demographic, she wouldn't necessarily be somebody most of us would know as, you know, it wouldn't be common knowledge unless you've done the research or you've been to a museum or you've just watched enough VH1 specials. But, you know, somebody like Rosetta Tharpe, who I'm not sure who her influences were, but she was definitely one of his, even to the point where she allowed him to open for her when he was still a teenager. And so it's kind of like, wow, it's amazing that, you know, somebody who was doing music way back in the 1940s influences somebody who, you know, would go on to do what they do. And then you fast forward to 2020 and you can still see the offspring of those early influences doing what they do in music. And that's one of the cool aspects. And so with Little Richard, like I said, he's just always been a pioneer in my opinion. And I think that because the industry has always tried to shut him out. And it's crazy because I wonder sometimes, you know, the reasonings behind it. Because, of course, you know that the industry is already cruel to black artists, especially back in the day. And mind you, his heyday is like the mid-1950s. And this is a time period when the country is extremely conservative. So when you have this very, you know, life of the party kind of entertainer who is unapologetically himself, no ifs, ands, or buts. If he wants to put on makeup, he's going to put on makeup because he feels that if he wants to look good for his crowd, because he wants to give his best, that's what he's going to do. And he dares you to say something about it. You know, he's going to have the pyrotechnics coming out of the piano and everything like that. He's going to be doing all these different things that you weren't really seeing a lot of artists do at the time. And so it's crazy that sometimes people try to erase that legacy. I had to side eye whoever was working over at ABC News because I saw that Twitter post they made where it said something like self-proclaimed, and then he put it in quotes, pioneer of rock and roll. I'm like, see, the prime example, the way that people will try to chip away at the greatness of some of these entertainers. And it's like, well, just because through your lens they may not have done what you think was up to your standard when in reality a lot of people just aren't researched enough, or they're too young, or they don't carry the reins to have the conversation anyway. You know, it's like, don't be disrespectful, don't. So ABC News, figure out whoever that is. Don't have them doing any more content on black artists if they don't know the material. That's all I'm saying. But again, the industry, I just think, was so cruel to Little Richard. Like, even the fact that somebody like Michael Jackson, fortunately, when Michael Jackson purchased the Beatles catalog, he was able to purchase the publishing rights to all of the Little Richard songs and give them back to Little Richard because he didn't even own his own publishing after you've done all that work. And when you look at, you know, in Little Richard's heyday, how, you know, somebody like a Pat Boone who would just suck the life out of every Little Richard song. If you remember, this is the era of race records where a lot of times black artists could come out with whatever they want to come out with. It could be a great song, but pop radio wasn't going to play it, too edgy. And, you know, as soon as you saw a black face, that's a race record, we can't play that, or we got to play it after a certain time period. So a lot of white artists would go and literally recreate the same song, and a lot of times the flavor would be missing, but it would be the bigger hit. So seeing somebody like a Pat Boone cover a handful of Little Richard songs, and then some of those songs chart higher than the Little Richard version, it's like, man, I know Little Richard wanted to meet some people outside on occasion, because absolutely not. But again, when I think about people almost trying to take away his legacy, I personally feel that had Jerry Lee Lewis not gotten in trouble and had the backlash with marrying his underage cousin, they would have tried to rewrite Jerry Lee Lewis as the pioneer of rock and roll if they could have gotten away with it. And then when I look at Jerry Lee Lewis, I'm like, but you see nothing but Little Richard in all of his presentation. Everything from the dramatics and the performances, even to the point when Jerry Lee Lewis would perform to the point where his hairstyle would get all jacked up. I'm like, I know you don't think Jerry Lee Lewis thought of that on his own. Okay, no disrespect to the other people beforehand, but it's just, anyway. Little Richard, I definitely think, is somebody, I hope society and I hope the history books and I hope those who are the big music historians continue to keep his legacy flowing, because he plays a pivotal role in pretty much not just the expansion of music, but when you just talk about showmanship in performances, when you talk about just the idea of originality and stepping outside of the box, not going with the status quo, you know, when it comes to music, and really just pretty much doing what you want, expressing yourself in the way that you are comfortable and not having somebody tell you what it is you have to do. That's what you're starting to see now in music, where artists, you know, they're taking their own free will to do whatever they want, especially artists that are going independent and not listening to the labels. You know, all of that is rooted back in those early pioneer artists that went against the grain even back then in an industry that, one, is already very, you know, lots of bureaucracies and everything like that, but then the idea of racism that exists in the industry and people being left out. So, you know, again, like I said, sometimes you're influenced by people you didn't even know existed. And so sometimes the accolades and the achievements that we see a lot of artists today make, a lot of times they're rooted in the struggles and the fights that artists before them, you know, partook in, and the fights and the struggles that artists before them had to endure in order for those doors to be opened and for other people to walk through those doors. And so I salute somebody like Little Richard, and it's a beautiful thing that he was able to live a full life and live to be 87. I think that's a great way to go out, where, you know, you got to do everything you wanted to do. Everything. And I also commend him for also calling out the industry. Always, like, he was never afraid to say, hey, listen, hey, y'all don't want to give me my credit, but I'm gonna let you know the reason that this and that are happening is because I did this and that. What you got to say about that? And nobody could ever debate him on it. That's the cool bit. And so, just an extreme talent. Definitely will be missed. And again, I just hope that society gets in the habit of celebrating all of these people while they're still here, where they don't get erased, or where it's not always we acknowledge them after they've passed on. You know what I mean? But that's all I got. Goodness, 2020, please don't take anybody else. Please don't take anybody else. That's all we're asking. But yeah, share your 2 cents. I'm out. Subscribe.
Sometimes at my days, 'cause I miss you. Driving through the mountains, facing the road in every state, coaching my teams, you were the pilot, meant to correct all my mistakes. And with age you were enchanted, graduated and made you proud. But I sometimes play your voicemail just to remember how you sound.